You're watching Health Day now. I'm Mabel, Jong. While wealthy nations prepare to distribute booster shots, the majority of people living in the most vulnerable countries have yet to receive their first shots. Bangladesh, bordering India, is seeing its third wave of coronavirus infections, and so far, it's the deadliest wave. Since April, about 60% of the 23,000 deaths reported were virus-related. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of garment workers returned to their jobs in major cities after a 2-week lockdown. Banks, stores, and malls have also reopened. With me now from Dhaka, Bangladesh, is Nobel Peace Laureate Professor Mohammed Yunus. Professor Yunus is the founder of the Grameen Bank and a leader of the People's Vaccine Alliance. Professor Yunus, truly great to see you again.
Great to see you. Wonderful to see you.
Well, the clothing factories, the mainstay of the economy in Bangladesh, have resumed running. There's extreme crowding in banks and malls. Won't lifting the lockdown restrictions worsen the already dangerous health situation in your country, or was there no other option but to resume business?
Well, situation, I would say, much better now. We have gone through many waves, ups and downs. We are very critical of many things that have been done. We are victims of Delta variety. Came from India. We are surrounded all around by India, so it's very easy to get the Delta variety into Bangladesh, and it did. And suddenly, the death rates, infection rate increased, death rate increased, unusually increased. And luckily, it started dropping down. Now we are in a comfortable situation right now. Infection rate has came down, and so that's the reason why government opened up everything.
We have been hearing that the virus has wreaked havoc on the healthcare system.
Absolutely, it did. It did. Yes, it did. There's tremendous pressure it put. Hospitals were overflowing with patients. Now hospitals are normal, not getting many patients.
Let's talk a little bit about the vaccination rate in Bangladesh. Less than 5% of the 166 million people in the country have been vaccinated. True. That's why so few?
For 2-dose vaccination, we have 4.8 million, under 5 million dosage. That's it. For 1 dose, we have about 11 million, the 1-dose vaccination. Now supplies are coming, streaming in, but not in the quantity that we would like to have. So I would say it's the reason we got the trouble was the sudden stop of the Indian vaccine.
Okay, that pause turned out to be quite a dangerous event. Now, that highly infectious Delta variant, which you mentioned, it was first detected in neighboring India. Now it's moving wealthier countries to start giving booster shots. How will this impact Bangladesh and people in other poorer nations?
The vaccine manufacturers are not manufacturing enough to give to everybody. A block of countries like in Africa, the whole continent, couldn't get even to 2% yet vaccination because the vaccines are not available. So the production is not happening. That's the reason early on. And last year, in June, we came out with a big appeal to the world, it's more than a year now, to remove the patent right. Because we tried to explain to the world that now we have the knowledge how to protect people. So knowledge is not the missing part. We know how to protect the people. It's easy, it's simple, but that knowledge is not shared with anybody else. So we are appealing to them to remove the patent right, at least temporarily.
The World Trade Organization, which meets in September, you believe this will be at the top of the agenda, and it could dramatically ramp up vaccine production if they were to be unanimous on the decision?
It should be in the topmost. It's a saving of life for people. But this is the only means we got right now. To protect people, you need vaccine. And this also demonstrates the importance of opening up the patent right. You cannot hide the knowledge from everybody, which can solve the problem of everybody. So this is a knowledge should be global knowledge to save global population, millions and billions of people.
The WHO has called for a moratorium on the booster shots. Would that be helpful?
They are just being polite by saying moratorium. simply saying that doesn't make sense. When people are dying because of the vaccines, you want to take the third one. Why don't you give it up and share it with somebody who needs it, the first shot? The production is the key. Rest is just debate and talk. If you don't have production, if you don't have the vaccines on the table, where is people getting the protection from if you want to save people?
Professor Yunus, thank you so much for your powerful statements. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Nobel Peace Laureate, Professor Mohammed Yunus, thank you again for your time. After the Biden administration announced that it will offer boosters to fully vaccinated people starting next month, some were thrilled. They could soon bolster their protection against the highly contagious Delta variant. Others, especially scientists, remain divided on whether the additional shots are truly necessary. And is it the right thing to do when so many people elsewhere in the world aren't able to get their first shot? With me now is Dr. Camille Kotton, an infectious disease specialist at Massachusetts General Hospital and also a member of the CDC Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. Also here, Dr. Amesh Adalja. Dr. Adalja is also an infectious disease expert and a senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. Thank you for your time, Dr. Kotton, and welcome back, Dr. Adalja.
Thanks for having me.
Dr. Kotton, let's start with you. As a CDC panel member, you voted in favor of the boosters being made available to a certain group of people. Who would qualify for this group? And after the most recent meeting of the CDC panel, what was learned about these shots being made more widely available?
Sure. So several weeks ago, we had been reviewing the situation for immunocompromised patients and realized that many people with moderate to severe immunosuppression had not had as much of a robust immune response. So we are recommending that they get an additional dose of vaccine. This is not actually a booster dose. This is actually a third dose that is considered part of their primary vaccine series. You know, for things like hepatitis B and hepatitis A, it takes multiple doses of vaccine in order to get protective immunity. And so that was the goal for immunocompromised patients, so that patients who have had organ transplantation or who've undergone bone marrow transplantation or who are on significant immunosuppressive therapies such as injectable medications or biologic therapies or high doses of steroids should get a third dose of vaccine in order to get better protection. That's a little different than what we are now beginning to talk about on the CDC Advisory Committee on Immunization Practice, which is a booster dose. So a booster dose is something that when someone already had 2 doses, say, of mRNA vaccine and had protective immunity, now they're getting a third dose to increase prior immunity. And that is an active discussion, and hopefully we will hear more over the next few weeks about recommendations for booster doses for Americans who were vaccinated, especially those early on.
Is there enough evidence that boosters are actually needed, since there are multiple studies that show existing vaccine regimens are strong against severe disease?
That's a great question, and definitely an emerging topic. There are multiple studies underway now, and some of which we are beginning to get data from. It looks as though slowly over time, vaccine protection decreases somewhat, and we are seeing higher rates of breakthrough infection. This has been noted in Israel and elsewhere. One thing I'd really like to say is that really what we're seeing is higher rates of breakthrough disease, which is still generally mild symptoms. People aren't going to the hospital the vast majority of the time, just they have a little bit of a viral syndrome. So the best way to protect yourself is by getting vaccinated to begin with.
Dr. Adalja, over 4 billion doses of the COVID vaccine have been administered over the past 8 months, yet the number of cases and deaths continues to rise. Why?
Cases and deaths are going to rise because what we have is a population in this country that is not heavily vaccinated. We have pockets of unvaccinated, especially in the South, that are susceptible to this more contagious variant. And many of these people are now back to their lives. They're out there doing things that they did before the pandemic. and they're coming into contact with this variant. And some of those individuals are high risk. They may not be 65 and older where we've got high vaccination rates, but they may be 45 with diabetes or obesity or asthma. And that's what's translating into cases and into hospitalizations. And in some of those individuals, you're seeing deaths. And the important thing to remember is this is being driven by the unvaccinated. That's what's in the hospital right now. It's not vaccinated people that are the issue with this pandemic. And I think that's the whole debate over boosters, I think, needs to be framed by that, because putting third doses into highly vaccinated populations isn't going to change what's happening in the United States. It's not going to change what's happening in Mississippi. We prevent hospitalizations and deaths, not with third doses, but with first and second doses.
Okay, but isn't there a case for booster shots then, since we see breakthrough cases and immunity wanes over time? So why not protect people with a third dose?
Well, I think we have to take a step back and ask, where are we going with this pandemic? What is the off-ramp? What goals are we trying to achieve? Primarily, we've been trying to prevent this virus from causing severe disease, hospitalization, and death. And by that standard, the vaccines, even when you see antibody levels wane or you see breakthrough infections occurring, they're still performing off the charts, because that's what they were designed to do. Vaccines are not bug zappers. They're not force fields. They're not meant to stop every breakthrough infection. And because the breakthrough infections are generally mild, I don't know that we want to be in the business of kind of chasing them with booster shots when this is not a virus that's ever going to go away.
Now there's a suggestion that even just 5 months after the second shot could be an option. Dr. Kotton, there's a lot of experience working with other vaccines that a well-timed booster can achieve long-lasting immunity. Is there science that would support a 5-month shot after your first or your second one?
You know, at this point, we are waiting on additional data from clinical trials, but I would say that 5 months seems awfully early. And I would really focus on, again, getting initial vaccines into as many Americans and people internationally as possible. And that should really be our focus. I think that for the average person, 5 months is likely too soon. And I think it's distracting from the major focus, which should be vaccination of all unvaccinated people. Certainly everyone, now over the age of 12, hopefully children later this fall. That should really be our focus, not people who are thinking about getting this 5 months after their last dose. As an infectious disease specialist actively working with COVID-19 patients, I'm more than 8 months out from my vaccine, and I am still very comfortable working with these patients.
Okay, Dr. Adalja, how will vaccinating people in poorer countries benefit those in wealthier nations? And how is that related to emerging variants?
Well, we know that anytime this virus has the ability to replicate, ability to infect new people, it's going to be mutating. It's going to be spinning off new variants. So the longer this virus is unchecked anywhere in the world, the more likely we are to see variants. And I think that's an important point to make, is that until we control this pandemic in all corners of the globe, we're still going to have variants. And the way we control this pandemic is by getting first doses, second doses into people's arms all around the world, even in the United States. This is something we've got to come up with a sustainable approach to deal with, because there are going to be more variants, and they may eventually be variants of concern or variants that pose problems for the vaccine.
Okay, so what are some of the suggestions or solutions that we should start addressing to get to that goal?
Well, what we really need to do is increase the availability of vaccines all around the world. And what we've seen is a lot of vaccine nationalism from many different countries. Certain countries still have export restrictions on when a company wants to sell outside of the country of manufacture. They have to get permission from the government. That needs to evaporate. That should never have been initiated in the beginning. And we have to support some of these organizations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or COVAX and Gavi that are all really trying to get vaccines distributed throughout the world. All of that's going to be very, very important. But I do think we had anticipated vaccine nationalism. It's strange that we're still seeing vaccine nationalism now in highly vaccinated countries where there's plentiful supplies of vaccine. So I do think those export restrictions and thinking about third doses in highly vaccinated countries doesn't make sense if our goal is to make the whole human population resilient to COVID-19.
Okay, Dr. Kotton, would you support perhaps waiving intellectual property rights on vaccines. It's been suggested that that could help ramp up production in other countries.
I definitely think that would be something that would be very interesting to pursue active discussions. I wouldn't want it to decrease vaccine development, but may certainly be a way forward.
And what do you think, Dr. Adalja? Would that be a solution, a viable solution?
I don't think it's a sustainable solution because we know that we need innovation in vaccines. We know that we wouldn't have these vaccines if it weren't for the innovators at places like BioNTech and Moderna to develop these vaccines, and it disincentivizes companies to actually invest there. So I've not supported any intellectual property rights waivers. And remember, Moderna has not enforced its intellectual property throughout this pandemic, but yet Moderna is the only manufacturer who makes the Moderna vaccine. So I don't think that this is something that will increase availability. It's removing export restrictions. That's the main obstacle that we face, not intellectual property, which I think is the cornerstone of innovation in the pharmaceutical industry.
Almost weekly, the World Health Organization calls for a moratorium on the boosters. It may be the right thing to do, but realistically, how long would a pause need to be? And in the end, what would it achieve?
So I think that it's not a question of supply. I think we could probably do both. But the question with the boosters is more about, is there clinical data to support the need for boosters in healthy individuals? When we added the additional dose for immunosuppressed populations that Dr. Kotton spoke about, there was clear clinical evidence with breakthrough hospitalizations and those who had solid organ transplants or those who were immunosuppressed. We don't have that data for the general population. So the WHO's call for moratorium, I think that's being more motivated by access in other countries. But I think that this is a larger discussion of what is the threshold for boosters and where are we going as a population with COVID-19, which is an endemic respiratory virus that's never going to go away. And I think that's how I think we should really think about boosters.
And Dr. Kotton, since this virus will never go away, do you envision a new normal that includes an annual COVID-19 shot?
That certainly could be the way of the future. I think it remains to be determined. We don't know about the durability of mRNA vaccines, so we don't know if it will be annual, but that may be the way of the future.
Dr. Adalja, say people want to do the right thing and they think that foregoing their shot will somehow let that shot get to a place in the world that really needs it. Is it that simple, or you kind of suggested that it's more complicated than that?
It's probably not as if your shot isn't going, it could either go into you or go into somebody in the developing world. It's probably not that clear because, again, there are export restrictions in place. The US has bought a lot of vaccines. The debate over boosters, and for an individual thinking about a booster, if they're a healthy person, is there a benefit to me getting a booster? If I get a mild breakthrough infection that's like the common cold, is that something I want to prevent with the booster? And is there clinical data that I need? That's how I think people need to approach it. And I'm very eager to see the ACIP debate the data when it comes to that next month, when they're looking at it to see what is the threshold for healthy people to need a booster.
Right. I mean, it sounds pretty suspicious, these numbers that are being thrown around. First it was 8 months, and now it could be as early as 5 months.
These types of decisions shouldn't be announced by the White House. They should be announced by the ACIP and the CDC. That's the way this usually happens. And if we reverse this process, I think we kind of go back to the old days of the pandemic where you had politicians making a decision about what treatments were effective or not effective, and not the actual scientists, the experts. And I think that's why it's very important that the ACIP process play out with these booster vaccines, because it is fueling vaccine hesitancy, because now people think, how can this vaccine not work in eight months? And it's also just giving people the wrong impressions about breakthrough infections, whether they were expected, whether they're a problem. And I think that's something that really needs to be debated, because it's very crucial for how we develop a sustainable approach to what is going to be an endemic respiratory virus.
And Dr. Kotton, is it concerning that many people have already run out and gotten their third dose?
Well, for immunocompromised patients, it is recommended for people who are on the list that we developed. Yes, so for them, it is recommended. I will say that I'm shocked at the number of people that have gone out and just helped themselves to booster doses. That is actually in violation of federal policy. I would make sure that clinicians who are involved in those recommendations be aware that it is a significant violation of federal policy, and that they may be liable if there are any major adverse events. And it's not clear who will be paying for vaccine under that circumstance. So I would caution people to actually not do that. It's also a little bit, just going to say, sort of greedy to do something that's not really recommended yet, just because they've read the newspaper and thought that that was a good idea for themselves. They also may be missing out on a better opportunity for a later vaccine. So I would really not recommend that people do that of their own accord until such time as we have good scientific evidence to support that.
All right. Dr. Camille Kotton, an infectious disease specialist at MGH, and also Dr. Amesh Adalja at Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. Thank you. Thank you to you both.
Thank you.
And I'm Mabel Jong. Thanks for watching Health Day Now.